everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the communities, for the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners get to connect, talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph. I am your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, my friend, Soraya Carrera.
Hello, morning, Soraya. Will. Hola. How are you today?
I am well. I'm well. Well, measured well. Little heavy-hearted, but doing okay.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think we all share in the sadness, and what we're referring to, for those who may not know, is the passing of Colin Powell, a great statesman, former Secretary of State, just a person who dedicated himself to public service. So we're going to spend a little time talking about him this morning. But I guess I should probably start with our disclaimer so that, we keep it nice and clean. So everyone, thank you for joining us today. Our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions, although a few of those might slip out. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. So, Will, let's open our conversation talking about someone who, you and I chatted before the show, I thought embodied leadership, and whose leadership lessons I adhered to. He had many great leadership lessons for those who followed him, who listened to him, who attended his lectures, or even read his books. And he was just an exceptional embodiment of public service. And that's General Colin Powell. He was former Secretary of State, served on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had a dedicated military and public service. So one that I know you admired and I admired greatly.
Yeah, very, very much. This one hit hard this morning when I heard it. In my career, I'd like to think he was an unofficial, mentor and role model for me. As I was looking for models to emulate, right when the time when I needed one, it's like, okay, I'm moving from individual contributor to now from a leadership and management perspective. He was coming onto the national scene as the selection for the Joint Chiefs of Staff under the Clinton administration. And I was like, wow, this guy, just the polish, the grace, the smarts, it was all the things that I needed at the time to say, yes, a career in government service. Mm-hmm. There was value and credibility in it, and he embodied all of the pieces in for what I needed at the time, and I have followed his career and have really been affected by his example.
Yes, the word is inspiring. He was inspirational. He really was. One of the things that I admired most about him was his loyalty and his independence. This is a man who came from humble beginnings. He worked his way up, and I think one of his quotes talks about that it's about hard work, determination, sweat. You don't get success and failing. And
Jamaican immigrants, his family of Jamaican immigrants.
Jamaican immigrants, that's right. And he talked about the fact that to succeed, you have to fail. You have to learn to accept failure. And so, he's a man of humble beginnings who worked his way through it all, served in the military with great distinction, and then came into public service, serving under multiple presidents from multiple parties.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I admired about him was his willingness to kind of, be loyal to his beliefs and not just, one party's thinking. And I'm not trying to get political on it, but I always admire people who are willing to be a little bit more balanced and see the good in others,
Yeah.
And if I could, one of my favorite quotes from him there are two quotes that I really love about him. And when you hear them, you'll understand why I like them, right? And the first one was, pissing people off doesn't mean you're doing the right things, but doing the right things will almost inevitably piss people off. I just thought that was like so true, right?
It
And
is.
I know that I'm guilty of that.
It's the story of our profession.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other one that I always liked, and I said it a little differently, but he said, what you can get away with until you try.
Yeah.
The way I characterize that, and a lot of folks that work for me used to throw it back at me every now and then, it's easier to say I'm sorry than to say, mother, may I.
Yeah.
That was like one of my leading things. As long as you're not doing something illegal or immoral, hell, give it a try, because if it's for the good, then we should try to do the right things.
Yeah, that framework of not illegal, not immoral, that open space. I really feel that's where I always thought that's where acquisition careers are made. It's in that space. That's where straw gets spun into gold. That's the space right there, outside of the hard boundaries. I go back to his professionalism and grace. That there at the time, and I'll say at the time, and thank goodness times have changed, but at the time there weren't many role models in government that had his experience.
Correct.
And had his, kind of his pedigree, whatever you want to call pedigree,
exactly.
that had his background. So it was very appealing as a young person aspiring in government. And that's another one. Government service hasn't always been, and I feel like sometimes it's worse now than it was back then. That government service hasn't always had a glow on it, and it was appreciated. So in those years, to see a professional general, and again, how many people make general? If you just stop there, how many people truly make general in the United States Army, 4-star general at that, Joint Chiefs of Staff. He just kept raising the bar. So it was really a motivator for me to say, it's capable. It's capable of being done.
Well, and he looked like us. He was real. He was a real person. You could sense that about him, right? When you read about his background and what he did, you sensed that about him. I also, one of the things, like I said, I admired his loyalty. I thought this was a person of exceptional loyalty. Even when he didn't necessarily agree with his leadership, he understood the importance of, there is a leader, the leader makes a decision, the time for debate ends, and you got to follow. And in fact, that was one of his famous quotes. So like I said, I pulled out a few of them, and here's one on the whole loyalty. He said, when we are debating an issue, loyalty means giving me your honest opinion, whether you think I'll like it or not. Disagreement at this stage stimulates me, but once a decision is made, the debate ends. From that point on, loyalty means executing the decision as if it were your own. And those are words that I've actually lived by, and I've said it repeatedly. I may not agree with what the boss is trying to do, and with great respect, you go and you talk to your boss, and you don't always engage in that debate publicly, by the way. In fact, more often than not, when you're going to disagree with the boss, I recommend you do it behind closed doors.
Behind closed doors, yeah.
Exactly. But once the boss says this is how it's going to be, you gotta move on. You gotta move on and execute the job, and you gotta own it, right? Because people emulate their leaders, the staff, the personnel. They really do look to their leaders, and they're going to behave according to the way their leaders behave. That's what it's all about. So I certainly, always agreed with that quote, and I always found it was one of my founding principles as an acquisition leader, that, let's have that debate, but then let's move on. And one of the things, I happened to be talking to a colleague of mine yesterday, and, one of the things that I always did was, if it wasn't my decision to make, or it didn't need to be made by me, I let them make it.
Yeah, get out of the way.
Even if I didn't like, if I didn't agree with their approach, I'd say, so I'm not like cool with that. I'm not too crazy about that. But if that's what you're comfortable doing, and you believe that's the right thing, you're closer to that than I am. Go ahead and make that decision. And similarly, and I would honor their decision, and I would defend that decision as if it were my own.
Yeah. Well, Soraya, I think you probably we have a similar experience in our backgrounds working for, what was a hard organization from the mission perspective. Not the people were amazing. The mission was fairly understood, in terms of immigrations and customs, but the country hadn't decided what
Exactly.
it wants to do with immigration. So that just made that job hard. It gave a level of complexity that I had never experienced anywhere else in my career. And this is where those burn the ship situations happen. It's like, okay, we've decided, people voice their opinions. We get all the information out. We do as much fact finding as we can. We get all the information. We get all the opinions, because opinions matter too. We get all
Yeah.
the opinions out. And then I think, thankfully, we had strong leaders that said, okay, we're going left. I was like, okay, looks like if it was my decision, I might have wouldn't gone left, or but we're gonna go left, and then we burn the ships. Meaning all the other options, we don't put any time and energy into exploring, plan Bs and stuff. We put all of our energy in executing, what the plan was. So I am appreciative of that experience. I'm glad I had it. Again, it built some muscles, and I'm glad I had it. But I tell you, there have been times where it's like, wow, this is just a hard job, just because the country hadn't decided what it wants to do, kind of in an immigration environment.
Well, and I think that's true for agencies like DOD, DHS,
Oh, I'm
even
sure.
Treasury.
Yeah.
The missions, they're very mixed, right? Some of them are about enforcing certain rules and regulations, whether you're in law enforcement or not. It's about compliance with certain things. And look, half the country isn't going to like what you do, and the other half of the country is. I used to say that about INS when I was at Immigration and Naturalization Service, and then subsequently at ICE and even CIS. There's always going to be somebody, and there's always going to be, some weighing there. And that's where, good leadership is extremely important, but that loyalty, that you're there. And if you don't think you can serve, then get out, go someplace else. I worked with people who would say to me, I don't know, if I can agree with the policies of this administration, regardless of which administration. And I used to say, well, when you're in public service, that's something you got to think about. You got to think about the fact that administrations are changing, that the policies and the approaches of the administrations change, and you have to make those decisions for yourself. Some of us, I can tell you that while I may have not agreed with certain administrations, my loyalty to the American people and to making sure that there was someone there who would provide that exceptional service and try to navigate those landmines on behalf of them is extremely important. So some of us were loyal to that. But yeah, he was that way. He was that way. He was one of those people that navigated those landmines until decided he didn't want to navigate them anymore, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Sarai, you just reminded me when you were talking. You just reminded me of, there have been times in my career where I have what I'd like to think, what I believe that I have lost, either lost or severely harmed professional relationships, but being loyal to the plan. It's like, this is what we're going to do. Okay, and I got it that we don't agree, but this is what we're going to do. And if it's my responsibility to execute once the decision is made, then let's get to executing. And I can distinctly remember a couple of times in my career, it's like people didn't understand. It's like, why is he following? It's like, because it's my responsibility to follow.
I tried to make sure that I conveyed that message to the staff, both not only the teams that directly supported me, but all of the members out there, that we don't always agree with everything, and we don't always think this is the right answer, but there's somebody in charge, and that person has to make the decision, and we can't just all go off on our own. And if we're uncomfortable, then we got to step away. You can't try to be disloyal while you're in the ranks. Right. It isn't going to work, and disloyalty doesn't reflect well. And in fact, it's one of the things that I comment on, that disloyalty doesn't reflect well. You may think you're doing something good, but ultimately, even though people may agree with you, ultimately it hurts you, because people will look to that in the future and go, well, you turned your back here. So one of his leadership quotes that, again, influenced me greatly, and it's one that I've often said, I didn't attribute it to him because it's what I really believe. And that is leadership is all about people. It's not about organizations. It is not about plans. It is not about strategies. It is all about people, motivating people to get the job done. You have to be people-centered. That was one of his quotes. And I've often said that in fact, some of my previous leaders used to say, we're in the people business.
Yeah.
And it's true. That's what leaders are. Whether you're in acquisition, finance, IT, in a particular program office, it's a people business. And then the last quote that I'll leave you with is, one of the greatest talents of all is the talent to recognize and to develop the talent in others. And I believe that is a key role of leadership, to build the next team of leaders, to build people up, to help them achieve their goals and objectives.
Yeah, well, Soraya, I have been an observer of your career, for a few years, my time at DHS. And I can say that emphatically that I saw you build people, give people opportunities, give people, reinforce support, even when if it may have fallen off the rails, it's like, look, it's me, not them, it's me. So I just want to say I applaud that. And here's a question: where did that come from? Do you think that's just something built over time? Is there something in your history that you saw? Something that's like, ooh, whenever I'm in charge, I'll never do, whenever I'm a leader, I'll never do that. Was there a thing in your career that seeded that, take care of the people?
So that's a great question. So there were two things. One, my family, my parents. My parents instilled in both my brother and I that taking care of people is our primary objective, that we serve others, that we help each other out, that we try to develop and nurture. And I can tell you stories of my parents, the kindness to strangers. I had one vivid memory where my father, when I was probably about 11 or 12 years old, he was coming back from travel. There was a bad snowstorm. His flight came in out of Chicago to Dulles, and then everything was grounded because the weather was really bad. And when we picked him up at the airport, he had a young woman with him who had a small child. She was traveling from California home to North Carolina. And now the airport's shut down. The woman doesn't have any cash. She was going to spend the night in the airport to wait for her flight for the next day. And my father said, no way. And he met her on the plane. She was sitting next to him on the plane. And so he got in the car and he said to my mother, look, this is blah, blah, blah. I can't even remember the woman's name. And he said, I couldn't let her sleep in the airport. My mother said, of course not. And we took her home. She slept on our living room couch. We took a drawer and made it like into a little crib for the baby. And then the next morning we took her to the airport and we put money in her pocket. My father, we gave her like $60, and it wasn't like my parents had a lot of money, and sent her home. And I always remember the nice letter that her family sent. But I tell you that story because that's what I was taught when I was young. You help others. You always help others. But my leadership style developed based on my own experiences as an employee, working for good and not so good leaders. And I worked for some really great leaders, people that, you'd never recognize their names, but they were exceptional and they were admired and loved by the people they worked for. And I always said, when I get into a leadership position, I want to make sure I lead the way I wanted to be led, that I wanted to be respected, that I wanted to understand. And I want somebody to care about my career. And I want somebody to care about what I was trying to do and give me their best advice, even if I didn't follow it, right? Because we're all rebels, right? And I do believe in developing people, even the people that I don't know, right? I can't tell you how many people have walked up to me after a conference or whatever and said, hey, I'd love to be mentored, but I don't know them from Adam. I'm like, sure, give me a call, let's talk. Because I do think we have to give up. We have to give back, right? It's part of our job. It's part of leaders is to be a role model. And I think that when you get to a leadership, it's no longer about you, it's about them. Yeah. It's about the organization and the people in that organization and helping them grow and develop. So thank you for saying that. And thank you for being one of the people who sometimes listen to me, right?
Absolutely. Again, I've had also in my career, those moments where it's like, if I'm ever in a situation, I'll know what to do and I'll know what not to do. And I think that's a part of the development that there's a saying, I don't know where it comes from, but it says that you can't appreciate the light, unless you have some darkness.
Exactly.
So you have to have those moments. I think it's necessary to have those moments in your career that are shaping, that says, "Ugh, I wouldn't have done it that way," and that once you look, and then you learn and emulate, from the opposite of those, like, "Ooh, we saw that didn't work. Let's do something else." So I've had those opportunities in my career, and I also have had some really great leaders and mentors in my career. One of the things people often ask me, I've been asked, it's like, what do you attribute, to your, if any level of success one may see, it's like, you've had some level of success, are there any keys? And one of the keys I like to think is I had people around me that did two things. One, they cared enough to sponsor, to be a sponsor, to be a voice. They cared enough about William Randolph that says, "Hey, let's see what this guy can do." And then the second is they gave me enough runway to sometimes go bump my head into a brick wall, but they gave me a helmet. It's like, so if you go ahead, try it. It's something I wouldn't do this if I was you, but if you are, go ahead. But here, put this helmet on so you don't get that injury that knocks you out of the game.
Exactly.
I've seen tons of people in my career that they do this one thing and it takes them out of the game because they weren't prepared for the thing to go wrong. And sometimes it's a coin flip. We try as much as we can to make sure that we are on the right side and we got all the information to make right decisions. But sometimes it just falls off. It just falls off the deep end. It falls off the tracks. But I always say, give people enough runway, let them try stuff, but just strap a helmet on them. So there's nothing can take them out of the game, because if you take you out of the game, then you can't do it. So I think that's been my experience.
I would also say that every now and then, especially when you're aiming them in a particular direction, I agree with the helmet. That's a great analogy. But the other one that I throw in there is sometimes you got to be their body blocker too. Sometimes you got to kind of clear the path for them. Yeah. And that was one of the things that I used to tell a lot of my leadership team. Our job is to help our folks understand where those landmines are and how to navigate them. Because sometimes people don't know, they don't even see it. They have blinders on.
Agreed.
Yeah. One of the things that I used to tell folks, especially folks that, I was mentoring for leadership, or people that I even mentor now for leadership, is it's really important for leaders to be introspective. One of the things that I used to do, so I used to drive into work by myself and drive home. I know for all the people that are, not happy with people spending on gas, I love it, because I used my morning commute to kind of think about my day ahead, kind of strategize what I was going to do. But I used my evening commute to review the day and to think about the things that I did. What did I do well? And what should I have done differently? Could I have handled that situation better? And one of the things that happened to me, and I started this, I pretty much drove most of my career, probably since like the early 90s. But one of the things that I started seeing was my ability to understand what I did wrong and act on it, to come back the next day and have that conversation with an employee and say, you know what, I didn't think that one through. I gave you a hasty answer. Here's what here's what we probably should do. Yeah. But more importantly, to apologize for what you did wrong. I tell people all the time, being a leader, you can apologize.
Absolutely.
You're not always right. You have all the answers. You're human, for Christ's sake. Show people that. But the other thing was to seek feedback. I thought it was flawed. Did you think it was flawed, right? Did you think that I should have handled that differently? Right. And it is through those conversations that you develop trust and that people learn to admire you and respect you as a leader. Because people respect and admire a leader who says, I got that one wrong. I should have done that differently, or I should have addressed that differently. I should have handled it differently. And so, I was thinking about, as you described, the helmet and people supporting you, being sponsors. It's also about people being honest with you about what was good and what wasn't good. A leader that tells their person, you're just exceptional. I worked for people who said, you were just wonderful. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm looking in the mirror. I know better. Yeah. So my point is, it is important to have that right balance. You can have an exceptional employee and tell them they're exceptional, but you also have to tell them what they got to work on. And I felt that way about, and sometimes I felt cheated when people didn't do that for me. When I would hit that blind spot and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, whoops.
And we all have them.
Yeah,
We
do.
we all have them. Yeah, I mean that's really prophetic, from a standpoint of wanting that. I
Mhm.
think most people think this. Of course, we want feedback,
It
but he's like,
hurts.
but it hurts.
It hurts.
It
There were
hurts.
times people go,
Yes.
well, I thought you didn't let me
Right.
talk. I'm like,
Right.
okay. And
But when it
it was
hurts,
honest and
yeah.
it was good.
And I think when it hurts, that's when the growth actually occurs.
Well, you think about
Okay.
it. By the
Yeah.
way, when it hurts, it stays and you think
Think
about it.
about it.
I
Yeah.
always remember one of the first 360 assessments that I got was back again in the 90s, because I'm older than dirt. Anyway, so I was at FBI, Federal Executive Institute, and they did a 360. And a lot of people, when they got their results, I always remember they were like surprised by their results. I wasn't. I was only surprised by one comment. My results were way better than I assessed myself. I was like, oh, damn, they like me. Okay.
Yeah.
But there was one comment, and that comment stuck with me for the rest of my career and still sticks with me today. And the comment was, I think you're exceptional. You do great work, blah, 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 blah. But I sometimes feel you don't trust me. Because things that you should delegate to me, you don't, because, little perfectionist here, you did a lot of things yourself. Yeah. And I will tell you that from the moment I got that comment, first I came back to the office and actually shared with my staff, because it was a staff member that gave me that comment. And I shared with the staff and said, I didn't realize that that's the way it was coming across to you guys, but I helped them understand why I operate the way I do. But I said, I'm going to focus on this. And I spent the rest of my career thinking every time that I went to do something, is this something I should be doing, or should I delegate this?
Yeah, very interesting.
And if I'm going to do it, let me help them understand why I'm going to do it. Yeah. And that's really important. That's like one of those little blind spots. I never thought that it was about trust. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I trust these people. These are my folks. But you don't realize it. And it's that kind of feedback that's important. And it hurt. I was like, oh, I don't trust you. I love you guys, right? So I actually focused on that, and I have spent my entire career thinking, and I do think about it very often. The other thing that I think about is that I am very strong, and I am very direct, and I am very honest, and sometimes that intimidates people. That doesn't mean I'm intimidating, but people are intimidated by it. And so I'm conscious of that. And I try to adjust my style based on the people that I'm talking to and how well they know me and that kind of stuff. That was the second hard lesson in life, that when somebody said, you're intimidating, I went, are you kidding me? I'm a big teddy bear. But they were like, no, you're intimidating. Think about that, right? Yeah. And so I did try to, find ways to retain that directness, that honesty, and that strength, but without being intimidated, or at least being conscious that somebody could be intimidated by it. Yeah.
Well, so I have a similar experience in my career, similar 360. I actually think it was at FEI also. I had my feedback was, William doesn't share. He's like, we don't tell you what he's thinking. I was like, me, the person that just talks and talks and talks and talks, doesn't share. But once I did some feedback, once I did some introspection, back to your point, like stop, listen, process, this comes from my natural introversion. I'm having conversations in my head all the time. I'm having 2 or 3 permutations.
Yeah, I'm just having them out loud all the time.
Right. And there are some that would prefer me to think and process out loud. But that just wasn't the way I process information. So what you do is take the information, pause, reflect, be introspective, and then you start learning. It's like, okay, people want to see you make sausage. And I was always one that said, look, I don't want to see people make, don't watch me make sausage. Just at the end, just say the sausage is good. But I don't want you to see me make sausage. But there are those, and I think a lot of people want to see the process, and I think you gain trust in seeing people work through the process. So I had to learn that over my career, as I like to think I matured through my career, is that people want to actually see the sausage being made. So I think it's a value.
I always said they want to understand the why. In other words, whenever you make a controversial decision, like, a decision of any sort,
Yeah.
I always was very careful for the folks that expressed an opposing view, especially, to be clear on the why.
Yeah.
This is why we're going to do this way, or this is why we're going to try this, or this is why we're not going to do something a particular way. I felt that that was very important to understand the why, because I think people need to understand the logic behind your decision.
Yeah.
That's what instills, again, trust and confidence that leadership has considered the options, that leadership has thought about this, because there are factors that sometimes people don't even know about, when you're sitting there.
Agreed.
So I agree with that. I think, and I push on that introspection button, because I sometimes think that leaders don't think about how the other person saw it. And
Right.
one of the things that I've always tried to be is empathetic, put myself in the other person's shoes. What if I was on the receiving end of that comment, of that statement, of that
Yes.
approach? How would I feel? And as soon as I put myself in that, then I start to think about, well, maybe I need to explain this better, or maybe I need to go back. And one of the things, and members of my staff would joke around about this, they'll come in at the end of the day and say, hey, Soraya, we should do blah, blah, blah. And I go, you kidding me? No, do that. And then I get in the car and go, well, God, I just missed that too quickly. So then I come back and well, I was thinking about what you told me last night. Yeah, and I don't know if I like this, but we could do this.
Right.
Because that's the other thing. You never shut anybody down completely.
Yes.
Never shut anybody down completely.
Absolutely.
Every idea is a good idea.
Everyone.
It just may not be the right idea at that moment.
Everyone has an opportunity for a great idea. Yeah.
Exactly. And I know we've gone off the deep end talking about leadership and all that stuff, but I think it is important to think about leadership when one of our great leaders in our country dies. I think it's a good time for introspection and think about that. And leadership matters. And I think in a profession like ours, it's extremely important, where you're constantly dealing with the battle of compliance and mission. Right?
Yes.
And sometimes those two
they wrestle.
Interrelated. You got to work them, right? You got to figure out how to do it. And that's why the conversation with our colleague Jennifer Longmire Wood last week was extremely important, because you're sometimes trying to pull that balancing act of saying, well, I know I got to comply with this. How do I do this and achieve this mission? Enable my programs, my customers to get the job done. And that takes a lot of leadership. It takes strong leadership to run acquisition programs, to run procurement organizations, and to teach people how to think about mission and compliance, and coexisting and making it work.
It does. It does. Well, Soraya, as we always say, the hardest part is stopping. I could have this conversation with you for the rest of the day. But this is our golden nugget time as we wrap down to the end of the episode. What's the golden nugget, if you have one for the community, understanding all that's kind of going on in the world today, and the loss of a great leader? What would be the nugget for you today?
So I think that the thought I like to leave people with is leadership matters. That if you're going to be a leader, make it count, right? Yeah. Be the best leader that you can be. Think about how you want it to be led. Think about your people, and remember, leadership is not about you. It's about those you lead. You can make a huge difference. You can be significant to people's lives when you lead the way people want to be led, the way you want it to be led. But it does matter. It's extremely important.
Awesome. I'm going to bounce off of that one just a little bit. I'm going to borrow a little bit of that one. And I'm going to say, everyone's watching. Okay. Everyone's watching. As a leader, when you think no one's watching, there's actually 3 or 4 people watching. So as you deploy, as you live into your leadership, and then sometimes your management, know that people are watching, and they're looking, and they're seeking opportunities to emulate goodness and greatness. So so give it all you got, because you never know who's watching and who's looking at you as a role model, or from an informal leadership mentorship. You just never know who's watching. So okay. With that, Soraya, we've got another episode of the books. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure doing these. I learn so much more about you every time, and then it often reinforces a lot of the things that I believe as well. So Thank you for another great episode. And
Well, pleasure is all mine. Thank you for being just a fantastic host. And I too learned from you. In fact, I always tell people that you're always learning from one another. So thank
yeah,
you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And again, our condolences to the family, the friends, colleagues, the people he worked for, the people he worked with. The passing of Colin Powell, a great leader in our country. He was 84 years old. Very sad to see him pass, but he leaves a strong legacy of leadership.
very
And I
strong
hope
legacy.
many will pick up his leadership lessons and carry them forward.
Absolutely. Thoughts and prayers with the family. All the best, everybody.
Be well.
Be well. See you next week.
See you next week.